Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Life with Laith podcast. Today we've got a super special guest. He's a good brother of mine, a man named Jack Villiers. I'm just going to invite him into this space right now. Back into the space. You know, the Life with Laith podcast, we explore quite a lot of different topics, and it's a real big vehicle for me to connect with people that have really inspired me and connected. Jack Villiers, brother, welcome to the
I can
space.
hear
Can
you,
you
bro.
hear me
How you
clear?
doing?
Yeah, I'm so good, brother. It's good to see you, bro. So, you know, mine and Jack's journey has been like a real journey, you know, of like both brotherhood, connection, relationship, understanding each other. But Jack, you know, without further ado, bro, can you just really drop in and just tell us more about who you are, where you're checking in from, and what you do?
Yeah, good to see you, man. Hope that Bulgaria was good. From what I saw, it looked like a long journey to get there.
It
Yeah, man.
definitely was.
Yeah, my name is Jack. I am a leadership coach, men's guide, and public speaker. I'm a father. I live in Ibiza. I moved here. I was born and raised in London, and then I moved here. God, it feels like a long time. September last year. Yeah, my background kind of before I was doing what I was doing now was kind of doing a similar thing, but really working in like fast growing tech companies. So I worked at companies like Monzo, Just Eat, MoonPay, and yeah, worked a lot in leadership. So now I'm at this kind of point where the work that I've done with men, the kind of deeper trauma related work that I've done, and then all this leadership work that I've done in companies has kind of converged. And that's led me to where I am today.
So beautiful, man. Like for me, you're one of the few men that I know that's really bridging these worlds, you know, bridging this world between, let's call it the men's ceremonial space and then the corporate space, you know, the sacred fire in the boardroom, as I like to kind of frame it. It's like bringing the sacred fire into the boardroom. And so, you know, Jack, talk us more about, you know, right now, the work that you're doing, like what does that look like, you know? So yeah, what are you up to? Like, how are
Yeah,
you doing
for
this? How are
sure.
you being that
So I have to
bridge?
go back a little bit and like really my own journey. I got into like working more in this like tech world when I was 18, something like that. And like I went deep in, you know, I'd come from a background where I hadn't really had much money. So like, you know, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder for various reasons, but I was like, I need to prove myself, right? And I worked like into this cycle, this perpetual cycle of just like working, all about the status, all about the money, how high can you get, how senior can you get. But what was really going on with me throughout that journey is like all the stuff that I needed to deal with from like my childhood, my past, and also stuff that was just happening, you know, like I became a dad at 23. There was some drama going on around that. And I was just repressing everything. So when I started to do men's work, like I realized how much of the stuff that I was working through was related to the fact that I basically burned myself out, ignored all of my options, like never really asked
Mm.
anyone for help, and was just in this perpetual cycle of like London rat race, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what really led me to be like, you know, as I became more equipped and I was doing the work that I was doing, I was kind of like, oh, like where are the people that I could work with that I could make like the most impact and who also need it. And I was like, one of those groups is like men in the work environment, like especially tech that I worked in, it's majority men. And like, I just remember now when I think about it, all these companies that I worked at, like walking around and now connecting the dots now that I have like the emotional awareness of like how much struggle and pain and repression was going on in those spaces. So that was really what gave me the kind of intuition hit to be like, okay, cool. Like this is going to be one of the spaces that I want to work in. In terms of the way that I'm doing it now, like there's a few different ways. A lot of the work, or some of the work that I do, the work that I do on retreats, stuff like that, is really available to anyone. There's like bursaries, there's scholarships. You know, I just came off an experience this last weekend working with a lot of people who, like me, are in recovery from addiction, who are again similar to me, are coming from like a lower socioeconomic um, bracket, if we call it that. But at the same time, it felt really important to me that if I was to go and work with like top CEOs, top leaders, like, so let's say you've got a CEO who has a company of 500 people, and I'm to go and work with them. And not only can I transform their impact and make them perform better, which is obviously important to them, but also I can increase their emotional awareness, their empathy, and actually get them doing things in a way that's more like sustainable, supporting their employees, that kind of stuff. I was like, well, working with those kind of CEOs, like the ripple effect is huge, right? Every single one I work with, I'm impacting like 500 people. So that's why I really focus on working with those men. And the way that I do that is, yeah, a lot of one-on-one coaching work, but a lot of it's like mentorship and advisory. And the thing that I find really interesting is that many of these men, and even some women leaders that I work with, the reason they'll work with me is they'll see my background and they'll be like, okay, yeah, this guy, like, he's been recommended, he's done all these things, he's worked at all these amazing companies, whatever. And that's what they think is kind of like a Trojan horse. That's sometimes what they think that they're buying into. And then as soon as I start dropping in with them and I start working with them and we start like kind of excavating like what's actually going on, they realize very quickly that they can't ignore the stuff that's actually their inner world and what's happened to them and their story and their journey and their pain and their trauma, all these different things, right? So it's really interesting for these men when I work with them, how they have this like eye-opening moment where they're like, oh, like, it's more than just like how much money I make, the bottom line and stuff like that. And I'm able to bridge that to them and speak their language in a way that it lands with them. So yeah, that's kind of the work in organizations. The other piece of what I'm doing is like, I've done a lot of like team building and like organizational culture type stuff, and been the person leading that when I worked in companies. And fundamentally, it's like mostly shit. I know you have some experience here as well, but like bringing in more of these deeper relational connective practices to the workplace and to like those kind of experiences is absolutely game changing. Because really what I see when I look at the workplace is like, it's one of the prime examples, lots of workplaces where it's like we've forgotten how we're meant to be as humans, you know. It's still like, even though we're together, there's so much isolation, there's so much projection, there's so much expectation. And I really believe that like there's a way of ushering forward this like new paradigm of business where there like is connection and we don't have to have this huge separation. I'm sure you've heard it before, but like, oh, my work life and my home life, it's like that separation isn't healthy. Like there's a way where, and the world that I've created for myself now is like, I even said this to my partner last night, like I don't look at it separately, like it's all one thing, and there's obviously adjustments that I make depending on where I'm going, but I'm showing up like the same as I would at home and at work. And like, because of that, I'm like way more effective as a leader and an entrepreneur. So that's the way.
Mm. That's really beautiful, man. Like, as you mentioned, I've also had some experience working for, blue chip companies. I did a lot of consulting during my master's with like large scale organizations. And actually, it's just so common how many people are burnt out, underseen in organizations, and then also how these then feelings then manifest within the workplace. And actually, like, what's coming through right now is actually to speak to like, when we talk about like healthy cultures, like what does that mean? But to frame that, what are some of unhealthy work cultures have you experienced within your workspace during your career? And because this is a problem that you're now solving, but let's really like hone in on like, for choice of better words, you hear about all this like toxic masculinity in the workplace, but what does that mean? And what does that look like? And from your experience, what have you seen in regards to organizations that for better or for worse, have quite a wounded culture? What does
Yeah,
that
well,
look like?
so if we go to the root of it, which is kind of the way that I work, I think about like, there's lots of like symptoms, of like this behavior, that behavior, sexism, burnout. These are all symptoms. Really, what's at the root of it is we've been living in a society that for however many 100 years has valued certain things like rational thinking and logic, and like the bottom line, like how much we make, generate, how much money we make, right? Um, and when you're forming like business and like creating things on that, well, it's only going to perpetuate like more of the same. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, when I look at it, it's like at the root of it is because like ultimately, if venture capitalists are investing in business, or when people get into business for whatever reason, more often than not, it ends up being about the bottom line and the money, right? And also about like competing and how much you can do and dominance and all of those things, right? It's like that's why there's competitors and all of those things, right? And because it's so out of balance, everyone who then comes and works in that environment, within that energy, within that system, regardless of who they are as a person, it kind of always ends up perpetuating that energy. And that's why you see like, okay, there's a promotion to go for. Why is there so much competition? You know, or like, why are people working like so hard to a point that they're sacrificing their health? Because they've been told this story, this narrative, we've been conditioned that like, this is the way that it has to be done, you know? So that's like what I see at the root of it. And the way that I see it manifests is like most leadership positions, especially tech where I work, it's like the majority of leadership positions, men are in them, you know? And then like when women do want to come through, or people who identify, you know, whatever, however they identify, people who don't identify as men, like the reality is they have to also emulate that kind of like competitive, dominating, unbalanced. I'm using the word unbalanced now more than toxic, but like unbalanced masculine energy to also get results. Then everyone's moving with that same energy. Like specific examples, you know, like the stats kind of tells like burnout, depression, and anxiety in the workplace, like all-time high, growing year on year. You know, like pretty much every woman multiple times in her career will experience like sexism or some form of discrimination, or harassment during their career. Like I know that for a fact in the industries that I've worked in. So it's like there's tons of different symptoms, but at the root, it's because it's like unbalanced masculine, an over focus on rational thinking and logic rather than like sustainability, emotional awareness, nourishment. But there are some companies, like I don't want to say every company is like this, like there are some nuances, different companies doing different things, some of which I've had experience like, you know, working with or collaborating with. But yeah, that's kind of what I see, you know. uh, so yeah,
Mm.
like it's going to need quite a big shift to change from that. It's going to take some time as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like, I think your ability to have been in that space, and you were saying some really like, strong words, like sexism and like sexual abuse and all these things that we still see to this day in the workplace. Like, we're in fucking 2023 and you still experience like sexual abuse and even racism and sexism in the workplace. And actually, like, the work that you're doing now is to really repattern that, is to change that. And your approach is kind of, with the leadership coaching, really going from like a top down approach,
Yeah,
by the sounds of it. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that and when I throw the mic, but it's that like top down approach that if you can affect the people at the managerial positions, then actually that's going to have a bigger effect on the entire culture. So when we talk about what are the solutions to this, like you said, it can't be solved overnight, but what are some of the things that, when somebody reaches out to you or you're working with an organization, what are some of the core areas of an organization do you feel like you're going to focus on, that you're like, actually, I know that if I can work on this area with these men in these positions, like this is going to have a bigger impact on the entire organization? So kind of
yeah.
the
So
solutions that you're really
just to
playing
go
with.
back to that piece that you said, about like top down approach, the reason that I believe that that's the best. So when I was working in these companies, my role, I was like a head of people. So I basically was responsible for like growing the company, making it perform, defining, evolving the culture, developing the leaders. So like that was like, I was in that spot already, that was like what I did for pretty much like 5 to 10 years. Um, but in my experience, the main way that behaviors are adopted by the collective is through role modeling. So like think about your entire life and how many times have you like seen someone in a position of leadership as far back as like being a child and seeing your parents or your older sibling or whatever, and you see what they do and you're like, oh, okay, that's like role modeling, that's what I should do, right? So what I've seen in organizations is, yeah, the main way that like value systems and behaviors are adopted is basically by role modeling. So it's like if the leaders are role modeling like unbalanced, dominating, competitive, that kind of behavior, or they're not really like open and kind of trying to foster inclusion or whatever, then over time, the employees who want to succeed in that environment, again, enforced by a culture where like succeeding is the main thing. How do we make more money? How do we succeed? How do I get the next house, the next car, whatever? Um, yeah, that's how it happens. So it's like, if for me, my thinking is like, if we change the role models and the role modeling is like a positive outlook, then, you know, it's going to change a lot quicker. Because I remember when I was running like the people strategy and stuff for all these companies, it was like I could have like the best strategy, the best plans, I could say all the things, I could write all the things, I could do all the things. But ultimately, if the executive, if the leader's like then saying like a sexist comment, or like saying I don't give a fuck about this, it's just about the money, or in some way or another, everything falls flat on its ass. So that's why you work with the leaders. Also, I'll be quite honest, like having done 10 years in that world, like I don't want to be part of the organization. Like I'm coming in more like an assassin to like work with the one person who can then make the change. Like I know that I don't have like the resources or energy anymore to be the guy, like that guy. Do you know what I mean? I'm the guy to like advise, coach that guy. Really for me, it's like in terms of the like techniques and stuff like that, like when I think about leadership, it starts with self-leadership. And one of the biggest things that I see with a lot of like the CEOs that I work with and a lot of the leaders that I work with is that their nervous systems are completely fucking fried, right? And like that was what I was like before I moved to Ibiza. Like even though I'd been on a path where I was like becoming more conscious of things and I'd been doing some work, whatever, nervous system was fucking fried. Like if my kid like, you know, had a, like was challenging, or like I could get there so quickly because I had no regulation, I had no capacity. So one of the main things that I do really when I'm working with these leaders is like, okay, like we need to get your nervous system regulated. Okay, then we have some tools to do that. Maybe it's, you'll know, like the breath is you know, can only talk about it for so long. Like you've got to use your body, right? So nervous system regulation is a really big one. And then you have all these like CEOs who are like, oh, I fucking love this breath work, man. Which is cool. But also like for me, when you regulate the nervous system, you're then expanding your capacity and your awareness. So it's like then as time goes on and I'm working with them, when certain things come up where they could follow a same behavior or pattern that they would have before and they've identified it, well, they've expanded their awareness and their capacity and their like emotional range to basically be like, oh, actually, if I just react first thing and do that, then I'm going to get the same outcome, you know? Whereas then they can be like, oh, actually, if I slow down and I think about this and go into more that balanced state where maybe they're thinking like their masculine principles, they need to take action, but there's more like a feminine principle of they're open to receive and to hear what's being said to them. So then they're able to operate from a place where they're way more effective. Does that kind of make sense? So it's like, yeah, nervous system, capacity,
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
emotional range. And then it's like, you know, as with a lot of coaching, it's like, okay, you've got to identify things and then you've got to be able to work through them. And also, you know, a lot of these people, as they progress up, no one ever fucking tells them what they need to hear, you know? And that's probably why my time working in companies and when I was with my consulting business was like, a lot of companies ended up hiring me just because they knew I'd fucking tell them what needed to be said. Like, actually, you're coming across like a fucking dick right now. Like, that's what I'm saying. Do you see what I mean? So it's like,
Mm.
yeah, you need to be able to tell these people because all they've had is like progress. I've raised more money. I've done this, you know. So you need to be able to meet them.
Mm.
Yeah,
Humble them
and that's not
and
me.
humble them,
And
you
that's
know,
not
by the
me
sounds of
saying
it.
that like I'm humbling. I'm this guy is coming from a place of like care and like I'm here to be a mirror to be a reflection. And when you build the trust with people, and you'll know this, when you build that trust, then they trust you to be the mirror. They trust you to be the reflection. But yeah, one of the things I can't remember, it might have been Holiday that said it to me the other day, but like, no, was it Holiday? I was talking to someone the other day and I was like, the world we've created, like things like breath work and nervous system regulation, it's like, it's a must now. Why do you think mindfulness is so big? Because like we've created like a world and a culture and things where it's like, we're fried, man. So it's like, we need these things, right? So that's kind of, yeah, that's kind of how I see it. But yeah, and
It's really
also the
potent.
final sprinkle I'll add on that is like, you'll know this, but often the reason that behavior and patterns are coming out sideways and all over the place is because there's stuck energy in the body, right? It's like, oh, this happened to me when I was young, and now like, you know, I've got this thing stuck here, or someone told me to shut up or not to sing or to never use my voice or whatever. And now I've got this thing here, you know. And some of the work I still do with them, again, it's like they may not have expected this when they work with me, but it's like, okay, how can I then work with them to move that stuck energy in whatever way, you know, a bit more of the kind of shadow work, trauma related work. So that's something that I think it's necessary in the workplace, man.
Mm. It's so vital. You know, you were talking about like, you know, just to really pull up some of those core areas that you really mentioned, like nervous system regulation, like how vital that is, you know, using things like the breath and embodiment to empower people to regulate their nervous system, to understand more about their nervous system, to be able to find a relationship with the fact that actually they're not separate. The mind and body are not separate. You know, we can spend so much time on our laptops staring at a screen. Actually, there's huge disconnect between the mind and the body, but actually, like the body keeps the score. You know, great book. You know, the body keeps the score on exactly what we're experiencing. And actually, when we're much younger and we don't necessarily have the tools to process it, then our body keeps this stuff. You know, Gabor Mate speaks a lot about, you know, the relationship between experiencing trauma and that being stored in our body. And then you're then going in and supporting these individuals to firstly regulate their nervous system, understand breath and embodiment. And I think, like you mentioned, like sometimes as like an advisor, telling them what they need to hear that maybe no one else is sharing with them, you know, having that confidence to say to them, you're being a dick, you know, actually what you've just said is out of line. And because maybe someone isn't honest with them, isn't honest with exactly what they need to hear. And so, you know, the real topic of this conversation, which we've really been speaking to already, is why is why is it important to make healthy masculinity mainstream? And, you know, from the work that you're doing now, like what world are we trying to create? You know, what world are we trying to build? And actually let's sit with that question. You know, what is the world that we want to create with the work that you're doing? You know, what is the world that you want to create, Jack? You know, what is your vision? What's your biggest why around like why you're doing this? You know, because it's important work. We're still so early in the game. You know, we're still so early right now. But you know, what is that world that you're trying to create, and like, what does that
Yeah.
look like? What's
Yeah,
coming
this is
true
kind of
around that
crystallized in
topic?
my mind over the last couple of weeks or so, actually. So it's kind of fresh, which is nice. So the real value that I'm working with and that I'm trying to bring forward is balance. So like the way that I see it is like if we look at the last few hundred years and even beyond, in a lot of Western society, especially, we've had misogyny, patriarchy, like all of those things, right, are real, you know, like women weren't given as much opportunity. There was expectations, projections, men had the lion's share dominating, and fucking boy did like men abuse it. You know, not all men, but like that's kind of the narrative, right? Um, but then what I've seen happen in the last few years, and especially because I worked very closely, like when I was working at Monzo, which is like, you know, really progressive company with its culture, and I was an early employee there. So a big part of that is like the pendulum. So the pendulum was at like misogyny and patriarchy, but because of that, the pendulum's now swung like so far to the other side that it's kind of like, okay, well, we shouldn't say anything, and men shouldn't be that masculine, and like, you know, there's a lot of like, you know, like kind of ultra feminism, that kind of thing. And you know, like basically, you know, men being sort of like emasculated because like some of these qualities which actually are like the balanced masculine and not feeling as acceptable because people are worried, and women especially are like wounded by these qualities, basically, even within themselves. When I was doing work with women this weekend gone, it was like I was really seeing that, how like the woman's masculine essence is actually really wounded, and that's again why she's reacting the way that she is when confronted by a man. So for me, it's like the pendulum swung so much so far that way, and that's also not good, because then we basically have men abandoning their masculinity, and you know, we just kind of create a culture where it's like, oh well, you can't say this or you're going to get cancelled, or all of this bullshit. My vision is that we have balance, you know, and by the balance, what I mean is there's an acceptance that as men, as women, someone who identifies as non-binary, whatever it is, like we all have masculine and feminine energy, and as an individual to be like healthy, happy, progressing, adding value, being of service in life, that needs to be in balance, right? But it's the same thing on like a societal level. You know, when we look at business, like I'm not saying that we need to have like business that doesn't take action, that doesn't move and like create and whatever, but also it needs to be sustainable. It needs to be able to, we need to be able to receive, we need to be able to slow down, you know? So my real, you know, this is like super high level. I could dissect this like a billion different ways, but it's really that we create a world where the masculine and feminine energy is like balanced within us, within society, and within the way that we build and create society. And why is
Mm,
this important to me? You know, it's like really that's like the inner journey that I've been going through. Like my path, you know, and the challenges and the things that I've overcome, you know, the way that I grew up and then the things that I got involved in and all of that kind of stuff. Like I'm in a place in my life like where if I'm not being of service, you know, if I'm not showing up and trying to, and it's not about, I'm not a savior at all. Like I'm at peace with how the world is now and like happy to just go through it and whatever. But I know for me, like in my heart, like I have to be of service in helping heal other people. And the way that I really do that by healing and teaching, coaching and whatever is by sharing like the things that have happened to me that I've alchemized with them. And that's really my gift in this life, you know? And I know we've done work together and like we've spoken about this. So yeah, like in summary, like what do I want to see in the world? Like I want to see balance, like masculine and feminine balance within us, within society, within the way that we create, within in the way that we build. Also on that as well, just like a remembrance of how we're meant to live. Like we're meant to live in connection, not separation, you know? And it's like so much of everything that we have going on right now and what we see in front of us is separate, the war on this, the war on that, cancel this person, do that, whatever. And it's like we need to come into connection, you know, that whole thing of like we need to call people in, not call people out, all of that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, I feel like that's something as well I envision, just like a remembrance. Like when I go to these experiences, you know, I've obviously done work with you and I'm looking in people's eyes, and I was with men and women this weekend gone in Devon, and I'm like seeing people dance around the fire and stuff like that. It gives me, and seeing the young people coming through and the people who have had some really challenging stuff happen in their lives, like it gives me so much hope, you know, that we can come back into connection as a culture. So yeah, that's my wish and some of my why.
such a beautiful man, like so powerful, bro. Like you're not only an embodiment of the work, you're manifesting that. And by manifesting that, you're taking action to drive towards that. Alongside this, you're a father of two, you're a partner, those are the codes that you carry, those are the journey in which you're on right now. It's admirable, and obviously that's not only, you're my close bro, but I've shared that with you. You also don't do things lighthearted. You're here to really really serve and come from that place. And speaking to this, like this wish, this vision of like balancing these masculine and feminine energies, because like you said, like the pendulum has swung so far one way that maybe we're in this like culture now that's demasculinating men. It's making men feel disconnected from their own empowerment, from their own strength. The work we do with sons, the work we do with different organizations is all about how can men feel empowered but also feel healthily empowered, to be able to find that balance between the masculine and feminine within themselves. But the fact that you're like now bringing this like into like large scale organizations is like, it's a huge area. It's a huge area where men in leadership positions need to be supported, because we can't go backwards, we can only go forward. But actually, like the way the world works, I think we have these extremes, and then we kind of find this middle way. And I do believe we'll find this, whether we find this middle way in our lifetime, or not. It's like what we're doing now is, we're contributing in the ways that we're contributing. We're allowing ourselves to impact the world in this really positive way, which is how do we support, we support the feminine by supporting the masculine supports the feminine, and vice versa. So it's like these two things are not separable. And so I'm really, really curious, to speak more to, your experience with large scale corporates. And now that you're bringing this work in, how is it received? Because what's coming up for me is like you mentioned, maybe there's resistance there, but actually, like, what's the angle in which you're approaching it? Because that feels really important. Like, what's this angle that you're approaching it so that it's not just brushed off, like, I did a post recently about how it's not all the feathers and sage. Like, this is the work. The work is fucking real. The documentary is real. We've got a good brother of ours, I see him as an elder, Michael Maisie, does a lot of work within like prisons. Like, you can't get more real than that when you're bringing the work into like prisons, so it's like, how is this received, and how does the work need to be packaged in order to be received into these? Because it's different to the maybe how we might do it in a field in Bristol versus like
Yeah,
a tall
yeah,
tower
it's a
in
good one.
central London.
Um, so yeah, there's something that I want to speak to, kind of links to this and to the previous point that you said about like just how people are receiving it and then how it needs to be kind of bridged, is that for men to gather in the workplace, there needs to be permission from women. So like again, when I think back to some of these very progressive tech companies that I was a leader at, it's like there just never would have been permission for men to gather. Like it was important that and my partner, as you know, has like done a lot of work around with companies around DE&I and as have I. So it's like I really kind of get this, but it's like, you might have like a employee representation group for black people and for women and for people who identify as gay and all of that kind of stuff, right? And I'm not saying you need an employee representation group for like men, but like if men are to gather, it's very, very triggering for a lot of people, especially in that world where the pendulum's kind of swung quite a lot. And it's like, oh no, we need to be really inclusive. And that means like, to be inclusive, we don't need to masculinity. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm getting at. But the really important piece here is there needs to be permission. So if you're going to land, like, for example, doing some work with men in an organization, well, the women need to almost give that permission and be okay, even if it does trigger them a bit, that like the men are gather. And that's really important then to explain when I'm doing this work is like the what, the why, and the how. Because if that's not clear, then people are just going to be like, well, what the men are, what's in our society when men hang out together, like what do people usually project that's happening?
A
Yeah,
fight or
drinking,
football.
drinking, chatting about women in derogatory ways, like that's it, right? That's how I, grew up with that like projection. So there needs to be a thing like the permission, and the organization needs to be courageous enough to go deeper. And the way that I call it now, and I'm writing a piece on this at the moment, is like allyship through healthy masculinity. So it's like if we want to create more diverse, inclusive companies, then we need to basically be allies through healthy masculinity. Um, so what I would say with just the question around like how does it land in organizations is like gently, softly, softly. You know, if I did a men's workshop at an organization, are they going to walk into like the meeting room and find me with my drum, like burning loads of kapow and like singing a song or something like that? Probably not straight away, no. Right. So this is where again, I think you referred to me, and I'll take this as like, for me, I know with this work that I'm really the bridge. I know how to speak the language of the people, that they receive it and that they understand it, right? So it's actually like a translation of like, obviously you all know this in men's work, like there's certain terms, there's certain chat, and the use of brother, and all of these kind of things, right? It's like it's a culture, you could say, in men's work, but that needs adjusting slightly because in the workplace it's going to feel different. Men, it's they're entering at a different point. They haven't signed up to a retreat and chose. So it's like gently, gently, softly, softly, translating it into a way that it's going to land, and making sure that like the whole organization understands like the what, the why, and the how. And there'll probably still be some people who are triggered by it, but that's okay.
It's really beautifully put, like gently, gently, softly,
Yeah,
softly. There's an Arabic term, yavash, yavash. I think I shared with this yavash, yavash, like bit by bit, slowly, slowly, yavash, yavash. And I think that's a really beautiful framing, actually, allyship through healthy masculinity, because like you said, it can be quite triggering for a lot of organizations, and even with the work that we do. Like, yes, I know that we've got a lot of sisters in our life, and I use the term sisters as like female friends who are really supportive of what we're doing. Yet, like I've been on a bus actually to Bulgaria, and I met a woman that worked for the NHS with mental health, with men's mental health. And I say, we do men's work, we see men gather, and she goes, that feels sexist. And I was like, no, it's important, that we're bringing this work through by bringing men together. But she was like, no, men gathering, that's in her mind it was a negative thing. So this, like, there's this real, like, we're so early stage. Like, we are in our own bubble. Like, I recognize that I am in my own bubble sometimes, but actually when you take one step out of that bubble, you just realize like how this stuff is still so early. Like men's work, like I did something recently on LinkedIn where I'm starting to kind of educate people, like, what is men's work? You type men's work into Google and you get like outfits for men working on building sites. Like, that's men's work. So it's like, actually, like, language is really important. I'm just gonna, just say this piece, and then I'll throw the mic. I've done some work in Egypt with one of our, good brothers of ours, a man named Pierre. And actually, during the men's retreat, we were kind of advised to not use the word brother. Why? Because brother is related to brotherhood. And in the Middle Eastern world, brotherhood is directly related to terrorist organizations. So it's like, you got to be really careful with the language that you use in the Middle East. Because when you talk about brotherhood and men gathering, well, fundamentally in the Middle East, no, they're not. Men gathering is either in a religious setting or in a potential setting of crisis or terrorism. So actually, like, the language that we're using is really important. So, on that language piece, like, what are you finding is like the language that we need to use? Like, what are some of the things that have been coming through for you around like language and framing when going into organizations that are going to make it feel more received from the boardroom, from the CEO at Nike, for example, who may have never been on this journey at all and know nothing about this stuff. Yeah. Education is important. What does that look like?
I kind of, when it gets into that whole thing about like how things need to be said, and like that was a really interesting example you used from the Middle East. I really appreciate you sharing that. I feel like one of the things that I found challenging is like when people are like, trying to get, like, kind of forcing like, oh, it has to be said in this, wrong if you say it in that way, that sort of thing. So for me, like, I would be honest, I haven't like overly thought about it. I think I'll just speak in a way that's like authentic to me. I probably wouldn't walk into the boardroom and be like, hey, what's up, brother? But I think there will be a day where I probably will do. But I think just using the term men, I'm moving away from this term healthy masculinity. The reason is because it's always like this thing again, it's like the pendulum, it's like healthy or unhealthy. Whereas I just feel like, I don't know why, for me now, this word of like balanced masculinity feels a lot better. But yeah, to be honest, like I haven't really like overthought it. I think like men's work as a term, like when I've spoken about organizations or I've said that I'm doing men's work, like they do, some of them will get it basically. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, as it moves forward, it's like it starts to define really.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, thank you for just this, that reminder around like how much language is important, but we're still working it out. Like the language around so many different topics is directly related to how a society has adopted language. And actually, and then what we're learning, and the piece that I shared is also language will be different, quite literally, in different work environments. And like you said, being authentic to yourself, authenticity is key. Being authentic with what most aligns with you. And actually, maybe that's the approach. It's like, how do we bring in authentic language which resonates with us within the environments, and recognizing that we might fuck up. I might be saying brother in the Middle East, and I might get a look that's like, hey bro, like you shouldn't be saying that. But that doesn't come from a negative place. That comes from a place that I'm learning. So it's also like giving ourselves the permission to learn, the permission to actually make some mistakes with the language that we use in order to relearn what the right language might be. And so, just a little roundup on that. Is there any kind of last thing coming through on that before we kind of start?
Like less about specific language. I didn't have much, but like for me, there's two things that are important, especially if you're going to go and bring something new to like organizations, and that's context and intention. Right. So like the context is like them understanding, like, again, that like the what, why, and the how. Like, why is this work important? What is this work? Why is this work important? How does it work? And like, what's the outcome? What's the impact? And then also that acknowledgement of like, yes, this is like something new. This may be like something that people struggle to understand, but the intention here is to benefit the people, is to help the people, is to help the organization. Right. So I think like, if you give context and intention to like whatever you're doing, especially when you're trying to do something that's maybe new and may agitate people, you're always putting your best foot forward. Like that's what I've learned as a leader, especially. So that's one of the things, that I think will be useful going on this journey.
Really beautiful, man. No, thank you for sharing that. And so, Yeah, it's definitely a journey, right? We're still early on the journey, but at the same time, it's like there's a lot of work to be done. That's what we're doing. We're doing it. We're doing it. We can only show up for ourselves, for our family. As a man, it's also, you're a father, and it's something I've not yet embarked on that journey. It's also like, how do you show up in the home? And that's a whole
Another
separate discussion, really. Because that's like fatherhood and what that looks like. And
episode, bro.
say that again, brother.
Yeah. Say one thing
Absolutely,
though, one
that is
thing that's
another,
hit with me
another.
over the last week or two is like, so, I kind of changed my business situation. I pivoted my businesses, and then a few weeks ago, after taking some time off, I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to go out there and like, I'm really specifically working with men. But even in the last week or two, something dropped for me, especially this piece around balance that I was sharing, which is like, I'm 100% going to be working with women as well, because it's like there was part of me that was like, no, I need to work with men, and like that's got to be the focus. And I've been doing a lot of work with men. I did do a lot of work with women before that, like in organizations as a coach as well. But really, this piece that I'm talking about, like this pendulum and finding balance, like it's going to take both essences, right? And it's going to take working with women and women understanding more about their inner masculinity and that essence, as much as it's going to men to understand their masculine, to understand their feminine. So for me, like where I've been kind of like, yeah, I'm going to really work with men, like that for me was just like I got a really clear sign, like, no, actually, like, I had a few signs anyway, but just like actually I need to be working with women as well, because it's going to take all of it. And again, and I'm not saying it's wrong to have like a specialism, and I basically what I think we need is like we need men's spaces, we need women's spaces, and then spaces for all of us. And actually now what I've really realized for me is where I can make the most impact is going to be in those spaces that's for all of us, in that place of like proper connection. But it's interesting, I think we need both basically, but that's just something that's like dropped in this past couple of weeks.
Mm. Wow, that feels like quite a big realization, especially because of, the work that you're doing and also the work that I know you're here to do as well, especially with the masculine. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like if the vision, if the wish is a balance between healthy masculinity and the feminine, then fundamentally the work is required on both sides of the spectrum, and everything in between. We live in the 21st century now, there's everything in between, right? But then you're right, it's like actually from like a strategic operational focus
Well,
perspective, like how do you
yeah,
focus energy,
men want to,
it's like
be kind of, I guess when something's like invited me in, it's because you see a specific thing that resonates with you. Like it's something specific. It's like, oh, a man sharing about this story of something he's been through and how he overcame it and what happened. And you're like, oh, I'm a man and I'm in that position. So again, I think like all of it is welcome. All of it is good. That's just like how it's dropped in, for me. And it'll be interesting because then the work like with organizations, like yes, I think there's a need for like some men's work in the organizational world, but actually what I really think the organizational world needs is this more relational work. Like these workplaces are like so lacking of that connection and of that like relationship. Like 9 times out of 10, if I've worked with like a leadership team, with an executive team, and I've come in and it's like, okay, what's going on? I'm like, well, they haven't fucking looked each other in the eyes for like 6 months, and they're all just like on with it, and there's no connection and stuff, and they're saying the right things like, oh, we want to collaborate, we want to do this thing, whatever, da, da, da. But it's like it's actual coming into connection. Like you remember the feeling when you first came to like a men's experience and you connected like deeply through the eyes, like what it feels like. It's like, fuck, it's confronting about yourself. And it's like, if I'm going to trust you, if I'm going to have a relationship with you, if I'm going to build something with you, and I've done work with you, it's like, I need to be able to look you in the eyes. So that's why I feel like there's a piece just like beyond men where it's like in the workplace, it's like, how can we bring more relationship and more connection? And then it will be more nourishing as well. It's like we spend, I don't know, like the majority of our time in the workplace, a lot of us, and it's like it's not a nourishing place to be, like most of the time. So that's not sustainable.
mm. Wow, yeah, you've really hit the nail on the head there. Maybe the biggest key is bringing this relational work into the workplace, and actually that is both men and women. That's really important. Jack,
Yeah,
bro, I know that we could talk about this topic for hours, as well as the fact that we have and we will continue to, and this is not only the start of like our brotherhood and friendship, but also, the work that we're doing. It's so early on, and there's so much. It's going to evolve. It's really going to evolve. But Jack, I really want us to close off here, and just going to let you kind of have the mic in regards to for people listening to this in organizations, in workplaces, and also people that are really interested in this, like how can they get in touch with you? You know, what are you bringing through in the near future? Just a little sprinkle from yourself, bit of self promo here, just to give you the opportunity just to share a bit more about,
Yeah,
you know, how
for
can people
sure,
get in
man.
touch with what you're
So
doing.
you can find me obviously on Instagram, where there's a link to my website, www.jackvilliers.com. Yeah, the kind of three things that I'm doing right now is coaching with individuals and teams. I mainly work with people who are in like positions of leadership, or you know, leaders, founders, entrepreneurs, but people who are like trying to build something and like, you know, they've got like a lot on the line, you could say. And then I also do that with teams. I do a lot of public speaking, so I speak about leadership, a lot about mental health because that's been a big part of my journey, masculinity, like you know, personal transformation, development, organizational culture, like all of that kind of stuff. So I do a lot of speaking, panels, talks, moderation, whatever. And then yeah, like workshops, offsites, and retreats. So I do like men's work. Sacred Sons is my movement, you know, that I'm really part of. So yeah, you know, Sacred Sons retreat coming up next week in Devon, starting on the 15th for anyone who's interested. So I do a lot of work with Sacred Sons. I'll be doing some of my own stuff, so my own mixed retreats this year in my home of Ibiza, which I'm really excited about. So workshops for men and women, again, relational, physical, emotional, all of that stuff. And then, yeah, I do a lot of workshops as well. So like workshops on all elements of leadership. So like everything from self-awareness to leadership style. So like going into companies and communities and stuff and doing that as well. So hit me up, bro.
That's amazing, bro. Bro, you are a powerhouse. I really appreciate you giving me the time today, bro. I really appreciate you, you know, really mean that. I know you're a busy man, you're an active man. So yeah, I appreciate you giving me the time. And I have no doubt that those that have listened to this are going to take away some golden gems. And it's very clear how people can support, but also get involved, you know, reach out to Jack, reach out to myself. If this is something that's interested you, if this is some work that you're curious about learning more about, we're always here to chat. So Jack, bro, want to say thank you so much again for your time, brother. I appreciate you so much. And I will see you in Devon
Yeah,
in
man.
less
Love
than a
you, bro.
week's time,
Appreciate you.
brother.
Thank you for having me on. Oh, ciao.
So much love, bro. See you soon, all right?